Okay, we're here today with Luuk van Middelaar. Luuk, you wrote this fantastic book, which has been translated now too into Spanish, which we're very grateful for. This is probably a book which was complicated to write. Also, it's well written, but it deals with a hard topic. And this is probably the first challenge that you found alone. How to write complex things in a simple way about a very complex topic. What was the challenge of dealing with Europe in such a long period of time as you deal with here, and also even trying to do some perspective and forward-looking thing? How big was the challenge? As big as Europe?
No, not as big as Europe. It was a big writer's challenge, and from the start I wanted to write it also as a book which is interesting to read. So it should have some narrative in it, so that you are drawn into the story as a reader. And I tried to, not to simplify matters in the sense of writing a book which is Europe for Dummies or something like that, but I wanted to simplify maybe by zooming out, sometimes bringing in some intellectual tools, but also sometimes by zooming in. Because sometimes you can learn more about how European politics works in a very detailed description with all the interplay of, for instance, one single summit. I have like 20 pages on one summit in 1985, and all what it entailed afterwards. That is sometimes as enlightening as reading 30 pages about institutional diagrams and with arrows and so on.
Yes, sometimes rather than a historian looks like a miner, right, or a geo-miner, like going really deep into something and trying to extract some frozen ice from 2,000 meters.
Yeah, because basically you try to get the sort of truth of history in a particular moment, and then sometimes you have to go into and then see what has happened in a particular moment and which shaped Europe in a particular manner. Because and it's also more fundamentally that I put a lot of emphasis on things that happen. So not on the structures, but Europe really as
on the events,
as a political body in time. And just like all of us in our daily lives, we have things that happen and we're forced to react. And Europe also struggles to develop itself, but also to react from the way it's founded into big events.
One of the things I like from the book is that there's always this big elephant in the room, which is the member states, with which most academics are uneasy, and it's difficult to talk about because it looks as if you are, by describing reality, you are consolidating it, whereas for many people Europe is about overcoming nation states. But in this deep incursion into how Europe actually works, you come out and you bring this elephant in the room to the clear and to the light, and you deal with it very openly and very frankly. Sometimes the conflict can be very brutal. And in Madrid. But how was it?
Because I did not want to be ideological. I want to indeed to tell the truth, to describe things how they are. And there's so many things written about Europe which are really in the perspective of how it should be. For instance, one day the European Commission will be the government for Europe. Well, yes, maybe not. But just let's look at what's happening today in front of our eyes and try to make sense of that. And make abstraction of these projections into the future, which can hinder something. And I also think that, you need to tease a bit sometimes and to...
you use the language which sometimes is also challenging and ironic and so on. And actually, one of the main findings, of course, and maybe the good news, is that the Council is in charge somehow, but it can be in charge also for good, not necessarily as people usually expect it to be, blocking, preventing, and so on. It can be a very powerful integrator, federator, even if it doesn't like to admit it in a sense openly and so on, but it's a very powerful force which could actually change a lot of things and deliver on many of these issues, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, I try to basically get away from this idea that all that is good comes from institutions and bad is national governments. This is not a very fruitful distinction. What I try to show is how Europe as a club of member states, how the club has become stronger, both by strengthening institutions, in coordinating the Commission and the Parliament, it's essential, but also by actually forcing also national leaders, ministers, to behave like Europeans, to make them assume responsibility for the decisions they take as European leaders. And that is a perspective which is sometimes missing, where it is either the European interest or the national interest. Whereas what I put focus on is really some of the key moments have been about aligning these two, and then this whole distinction becomes.
And then you moved to Brussels.
Yes.
And start working for in the cabinet of Herman Van Rompuy, the president of the European Council. How big was the mismatch between what you look at from a historian point of view and what you see happening in front of your, not window, but your desk, in Brussels? Was it an awakening, a confirmation, a revelation? How does it work?
It was both. I think it was a big confirmation, maybe an unfortunate confirmation, but the big confirmation was that Europe gets moving in times of crisis. And when I arrived, it was 1st of January 2010, basically. A few weeks later, we had the beginning of the Greek crisis, facing bankruptcy. And from then on, it was like, well, now it's a little bit less, but for 2.5 years, sort of endless stream of events and crises, which were set into motion. And then I more or less, I could say, well, as I had foreseen how the crisis, but that when in a moment of crisis at the European Council, the leaders is the place of action. That was quite clear, so I was in that perspective not surprised that on the other hand, before I in the book I write also a lot about the importance of public opinion, about the legitimacy of Europe for citizens, basically to support the whole edifice. And I thought we would also, we collectively, work a lot around that. And that has been much less the case. Also, that's less the case than I thought beforehand, which is very important when you think about Europe, or what can Europe be in the world of today, and foreign policy and so on. That was much less central to what I had seen up close, but it was all about stability, quantity, stability, and jobs. And in ways more, because the crisis was so deep, and so existential. You would expect this, but that I haven't.
Then sort of you go full circle to your original preoccupations, or at least observations as working in a national parliament with democracy comes again into the picture. So then, probably final question. Should we democratize the European Union? Should we bother, or should we just resign ourselves to having an imperfect union at the level of democratic legitimacy? Should we at least should we try to maximize or minimize or compromise also on that? Or should we really be ambitious about this? And that's the question sort of, should we, and can it be done? Should we bother doing it? We all agree that this is essential, but how much energy should we devote to that? And what should be the level of ambition? A maximum level of legitimacy, or legitimacy as we go? It's a sort of pay-per-view in which you instill a bit of legitimacy here and there as you go.
No, I think it will always be a bit more of the latter, but if you look back, during the crisis at the start, there was really hardly any appetite to look at institutional matters or matters of democracy among the leaders who were basically, in their own minds, firefighting. And they all know that institutional discussions between 28 European countries and institutions can take very long, very divisive and so on. So the view was, we do not solve the economic crisis by creating an institutional crisis. Well, maybe that sentiment is now shifting, and people realize that it's also important for democracy to work at the European Union level and to not impede national democracies. So there is some space for this debate, but not in the sense that I still do not feel, I mean, as an observer close by, I do not feel the impact for a big institutional overhaul yet. Maybe the pressure will mount, but it's not there yet, because there's also no perfect answer. I mean, it's not like we simplify the system and then we can deliver the policies we want. I mean, look at the United States, they have one president, two parties in one country. And still, there are so many things, like public health care, bringing to a decent level, which they cannot solve. And we in Europe, we are 28 countries, so many parliaments, public opinions, and it is very often pretty complicated, but simplifying for the sake of simplifying, or that doesn't work. There will always be tensions which we have to deal with.
So thank God for giving us a complex EU, which we have to understand and write books about. If it was easy
to make people aware that really Europe is also about them. It's not something outside of Brussels, but it's part of even their own national political life.
Okay, thank you so much.